I'm a senior associate at FedTech and delighted to be working with 4 excellent panelists today to just illuminate different perspectives on primes and funding. So first and foremost, I am joined by Mr. Jim Kainz. He is Senior Vice President of Applied Research Associates. Mr. Kainz guides strategic planning and ARA's corporate initiatives to help ARA grow and bring next generation innovation and technologies to customers and stakeholders. Additionally, delighted to be joined by Dr. Christopher Lay, founding partner of Leonid Capital. Chris has a very diverse background that includes professional practices across healthcare, financial services, technology, as well as significant experience operating in private equity and hedge fund investment environments. And also, prior to his work in the financial services space, Chris accumulated 15 years of experience in neuroscience, including therapeutic drug monitoring. Additionally, super excited to welcome Djian Salgado, operating partner of R3 Experiential. Djian is super busy, to be honest. He has played pivotal roles in 11 successful exits, including 3 unicorns and 2 IPOs over the past 15 years. His diverse experience spans from his role currently as operating partner at R3 Experiential to collaborating with DHS, specifically the Science and Technology Directorate, as an entrepreneur, where he focuses on commercializing AI solutions for maritime security and supply chain safeguarding. And he is also an entrepreneur in residence at various private equity groups. And additionally, I just want to highlight, despite all those activities, he takes a lot of time to mentor founders and startups through FedTech's programs, so very grateful for that. And last but certainly not least, delighted to welcome Ms. Rachel Stern, founder of GovTech Ventures and angel investor. So Rachel has over a decade of experience in the GovTech industry, bringing together a background in venture investing, lobbying, operations, fundraising, and strategy. And she has worked with companies of really every size, from Fortune 500s to pre-seed startups, helping them navigate and partner with state and local governments to drive innovation. So really just stellar perspectives here. Really excited to jump in. But before we get to our questions, I really did want to hand it over to the panelists to let them tell their stories. So Rachel, if you wouldn't mind kicking us off.
Okay, we're good to go. Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you, Rachel Stern. My background really is in this combination of state and local government innovation, partnered with technology, and sort of the best practices for technologies to forge those partners, whether that is product market fit and identifying the easiest low-hanging fruit, whether that's hiring lobbyists or market creation through legislation, and helping companies of every scale get into those markets, whether it's developing a new product or developing partnerships or developing an innovation strategy early on pre-revenue. So really excited about some of the companies we saw here today, and have been on both sides of the table, both as a funder and a fundraiser. So looking forward to the discussion.
Well, I'm definitely the least qualified here, but it's a privilege to be here with all of you, so thank you. I'll try not to bore all of you. So, serial entrepreneur, a bit of a mad scientist, a couple exits. I think really the best way to describe me has been to collaborate with all the folks here, right, to help them spend their money intelligently, and to help folks that Rachel works with usually go from 0 to 1 to 1 to 2, right? At the end of the day, it's how are you a fixer and how do you eat frogs for people so they don't have to? And that's probably the best way that I can describe my career.
We have our own. Thank you all. Thanks for the invite here. And so a little bit of background. People are probably wondering, why am I here? Because I don't have the checkbook. I'll just say that right now. But I'm happy to help as much as I can. So I've been in the research and development tech sector for 30 plus years. Last 24 years at a company called Applied Research Associates, ARA, 100% employee-owned company, which is unique in the DoD sectors because we primarily work for the Department of Defense. Before that, I worked for 10 years in the government. Worked for the USDA Forest Service. And so have that unique combination of both working for the government side, also working in the private sector. I have a technical degree. I'm a civil engineer by training, and now do business development and growth for our firm. What's in the past, 24, 30 years, I have seen firsthand the changes in the government and how the government buys. And so I think that that's something that I think we'll talk about today. And there are some very serious challenges to work with the government, but also some great opportunities to work there too. And I think that it's a unique landscape. It's something I've never felt like I had to get away from as a childhood entrepreneur myself. It's something that it's highly entrepreneurial. So, looking forward to the conversation.
Good afternoon, everybody. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here with you all. By way of background, quickly, I started out my career as a National Institute of Health and DARPA-funded doctoral student. My focus was around concussive brain injury therapies, traumatic brain injury therapies, essentially things you could do in the back of a helicopter or Humvee to buy somebody that's had a concussive blast injury more time. I went on to commercialize that thesis work through a startup company that was purchased by Johnson & Johnson, and that experience really moved me down the path towards entrepreneurship and investment, broadly speaking. Today, I'm the co-founder of a private credit fund. We are the only Department of Defense trusted capital provider as a financing company. There's other trusted capital providers out there, to be clear, but on the debt side, we're unique, happily. We also partner very closely with the Office of Strategic Capital, if some of you are familiar with that group and organization as well. Our claim to fame is providing venture debt, term loans, revolving lines of credit, acquisition financing that is very, very bespoke, very, very custom tailored to companies that are working with the government, either exclusively or the government as one of several customers to their products and services. Our team is composed of scientists, engineers, veterans, people that understand the SBIR, STTR space from firsthand experience, and with great humility. We do have a checkbook, and would love to speak to anybody that's touching that space. We love to do great work. We love to help people have great outcomes, and we do that through financing. So really excited to share more about our mission with you all. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, as you can see, just stellar panel we have here today. So, Chris, first question for you. So, as you mentioned, right, the U.S. Department of Defense trusted capital provider, kind of unique role that you all play. Would love to start off the conversation just a bit more on the macro perspective, right? So, in terms of emerging trends you all see in terms of the startups you work with as it relates to the defense space.
Yeah, other people much more qualified than myself have certainly noted this, but our clear sense is a shifting in defensive posture towards a great powers defense. That necessitates, from my end of the spectrum, a huge amount of investment, both on the private and the public side, in not just sort of the exquisite capital project, right? It's not just more ships. It's all the logistics, supply chain, cybersecurity, IT services, all of this various technology that supports and provides infrastructure around national security broadly. And so, within the SBIR space in particular, DoD's SBIR budget increased 20% by contract amount year over year in 2022, 17.6% by dollar amount. So there are huge tailwinds, and for me, I am so enthused that I think certainly this ecosystem, but I think there's a broader awareness of just how critical it is to, forgive me for using the phrase, but fund the arsenal of democracy. And so, we can do that in a very, very jointly fashion. It's something I'm very excited about.
Excellent. Well, thank you for starting us off with that kind of big picture, right, top of the ocean in terms of funding sort of trends. But I want to hand it over to Rachel, right? You have, I think, a very unique perspective as it relates to more the state and city landscape. So would love to hear, your thoughts, right, particularly playing off of what Chris just mentioned. Would also, if you want to highlight anything particularly for California.
Sure. So when I think about companies that can sort of spread the wealth both between federal and state and local, I think of a couple of buyers, right? One is traditional fundraisers, VCs, growth equity, and what they're looking for. And what we've seen in this market is that post-pandemic, when valuations were so crazy, a lot of VCs and growth equity firms are actually looking to GovTech and are open to investing in that space because yes, it's a very high barrier to entry and high barrier to revenue. But once you're in, everyone in this room knows it's very, very sticky. And so they can go to their LPs and sort of point to a slightly more stable source of income within their portfolio. That being said, very few companies are going to start new with GovTech. So as you go out and fundraise, look for VCs or investment firms that already have at least one GovTech company within their portfolio. Because alongside that sort of LP skittishness is this lack of desire to try to pitch them on new ideas. So it's great as you think about funders and going out and raising early stage capital to find VCs that have at least one GovTech within their portfolio. On the other side are sort of the state and local buyers. And what we've seen there is that budgets have been really bloated over the last few years since the pandemic. There was a tremendous amount of federal dollars flowing down into those markets. And they really only have another 6 months to a year to spend it. So there will be a buying spree to a certain extent, but then we anticipate budgets tightening again. And so what I tell our portfolio companies is continue to really hone in on finding a solution to a problem government already knows they have. We all know government doesn't function perfectly, federal, state, and local. And we can all identify problem sets, like why are we still going to the DMV? But the reality is that unless government knows it's an issue, whether they're getting dinged in the media or they have a specific edict through legislation to transform a process or a service, it's going to be very hard to find a buyer. So more than ever, sort of that focus on thesis and focus on solving a very known problem set is going to allow companies to scale. California is pretty good at innovation. We don't do everything perfectly, but I would say innovation and things like Inland Empire and Sacramento has investment, and places outside of the Bay Area are really starting to sort of circle the wagons and figure out how they pool capital and keep startups in those areas that typically don't have access to huge streams of capital. And that just means that there are some really exciting things coming up through these regionalized portfolios, but also in what the state is looking to buy and really staying on the tip of the spear of innovation.
Excellent. Appreciate that perspective too, and good news, right, for anyone who's here in this room, right? The fact that Rachel is seeing a lot of coalescing around regions outside of the Bay Area. There's hope. You don't have to go back there. You can build innovation right here. So I want to pivot a little bit and look at another perspective that, at least at FedTech, I feel like it's often overlooked, which is the family office space, right, as a resource. And so, Djian, I know you do a lot with family offices, so would love to get your perspective, right, on some common criteria, maybe time horizons that family offices might look at for founders in this audience, particularly those who are unfamiliar with family offices.
Certainly. I think a family office is a fancy way of saying you have cash. Yeah, let's just kind of cut to the chase. Cash is ammunition, and whether you call it a hedge fund, private equity, debt, as my colleague here, Dr. Lay, so eloquently laid it out, is when you fund the Arsenal of Freedom, the reality is, what do you call this dollar, right? Everything usually has to be paid back, and there has to be a margin. So the reason I lay it all out there from the financial, what are we going to call this dollar, is the family office is a very convenient way sometimes for, let's say, myself or my friends and I to take a look at a deal flow like this and collaboratively take a look at, okay, what makes sense, right? Maybe I'll buy 8% of the company, but you come in and give me a loan so that I can acquire his company. And then subsequently we can go to the Navy and say, hey, I fixed this problem because Rachel told us that that's exactly where he was hurting. So the family office problem that you have is, number one, how do you show true value, right? A lot of family offices, the answer to the first question, great, is to look at your team, okay? So you've validated an idea, that's great. How are you gonna execute on this, right? It's all about time management. So the operating team is, I think, the thing you're going to sell on the most, especially when you have an idea. A lot of your technology readiness levels are just frankly non-existent. They're just a concept, but it doesn't mean they don't have value, right? You know how to solve a problem, you have the gumption. So the other aspect of the family office and how you can leverage it is how do you get awareness to them a lot more quickly, right? And frankly, that's something we've been working on a bit to how do you optimize that process, because being an entrepreneur is really like having 3 jobs, right? You're doing the product, you're doing the selling, and then you're doing the fundraising. And that's if you don't actually have another job to pay for your bills to compile for all of this, right? So the cool thing about a family office is that once you build that relationship, it can be like long-lasting and deep like the ocean, I like to say, right? Like deep water. Once you've shown to people that you can actually solve a problem for them worth solving, like in your case, Johnson & Johnson, right? Once you do that, they know you're the guy. You're the guy, you're the go-to guy, right? You're either the investment committee guy that can sniff out BS, excuse my language, or you're the guy who's like, you know what? I think if you give me 15 hours every week, I could get it across the valley of death. And that happens by having a strong relationship with your family office. At the end of the day, we're all investors, right? I can cut a check, so but I'm very stingy about my money. But to me, the definition of success is like we all collaborate as a network because we de-risk the conversation. But more importantly, that's how we get our deal flow, right? So a family office is a very, very important resource that's often seldom utilized until the very end, where everybody has FOMO and they're buying the name brand companies, right? So I won't do free advertising here, but you know who those are. And so a lot of the times it's better for you to have a conversation because you could have a bigger value add earlier on for them, further upstream, so that later on, for all intents and purposes, we can create the FOMO, right? Hopefully that answers the question.
Perfect. Thank you. So with that, I'm going to switch it up a little bit and want to look at scaling, right? So Jim, would love to hear your thoughts. I know you've worked with a lot of startups, right? So any advice you have as it relates to scaling and technology development?
And just for the record, just in case my boss is watching, we're not for sale. So I just want to put that out there. So we'll talk about scaling. Scaling is, I think, really key, and it's something that I forgot to mention. When I joined the company day one, I turned us from a small to a large. And I've watched us scale over time in size, and that was at a different time. That was 24 years ago. I think today it's a much more challenging environment because the expectation is you have to hit the ground running. Innovation only goes so far. Coming up with a new idea that's in a lot of ways, as an entrepreneur, that's the small part of the problem. Coming up with a really good idea. The next stage is, how do I get funding, as you talked about, and then how do I produce it? That's something that I think is really important, and I'm hearing more and more right now as looking at how companies scale to get things into the hands of the warfighter, which is the key. That's why we're here. That's why we're here trying to do this, is you have to think about how you're going to produce that really cool widget that you developed almost from day one, and that's a different problem than developing the really critical research and development. It's a different kind of research and development. So to scale that is really important. It's something to think about. And so to understand that, I think, and for planning purposes, I think it's really important that we understand what that demand signal is. And that's something when I talk to my people, when I talk to other smalls, is if we understand what's going to come down the line, we can plan accordingly. And I think that's one of the things I was actually talking to Scott about that earlier, Scott Bewley, is if we understand what the demand signal is, it makes a difference on what we can do and what we're willing to invest in. And so that's something that's external that helps you scale. And then I also think that finding good partners to help you on that process for smalls is really important. And I think I'm repeating a lot of things that we've already talked about today. In the previous panel, they talked about finding a good partner it's like it's weight in gold as a small, because somebody you can trust, but you got to do your homework. Number one, even as a large, we've been burned by partners. So you do your homework, make sure the deals are signed and they're rock solid, but they can really make a difference for how you want to do it. And then I think that the final thing is finding that transition pathway, and it kind of goes in line with that production. What production is, scaling, is almost everything that you're going to do. If you're going to put it on a ship, if you're going to put it on a sub, if you're going to put it on an airplane, you got to figure out what that transition pathway is. Whether it's software, whether it's a new sensor, you're going to have to figure out, because unless you're in the business of building a new F-35, which I'm not sure our entrepreneur community is ready for, all apologies, I think you're going to have to figure out what that transition pathway is. And so that's another part of the scaling process. And so working, that's another thing to think about, working all those things into that process.
Excellent, thank you. So I want to, for the next question, pose to everyone here, right? I imagine you'll have slightly different takes on this, but question is, how do you evaluate the potential of a founder, right? And really, what makes a startup stand out to you? Rachel.
Yeah, so when I think about the diligence process, it involves, of course, meeting a founder, a founding team. I like understanding a team's history together. In fact, I prefer it if people aren't friends first, but bring two very different complementary skill sets. I've seen a lot of friend and romantic breakups over startups. So it's finding the solidity of that team of people who are solving different parts of the business. It's hard to have two CEOs who sort of both want to go out and sell. For me, in state and local markets, there's a couple of tells of whether or not a market is ready for a product. One is legislative research. So there are a lot of both paid and free tools that will tell you what legislation has been introduced in the last couple of years in a market. And I look to see that a couple of states are already identifying something as a problem. Either putting funding behind it or creating a working group or in conversation around it. Because again, that makes it a much easier conversation on product market fit and sort of not going after every shiny object, but really force ranking the opportunities. I also, of course, always read the news, same idea. What states are talking about, where funding is, what they're being dinged on. That can be very telling to find that sort of solution match. I like, startups that have traction, of course, but I don't even mean traction just in the sense of revenue. I mean, having had 50 to 100 conversations with a potential customer and being able to speak more intelligently than anyone in the room about what those customers want. Whether that's signed LOIs, we should be so lucky, but really being able to go into a conversation and say, we've had a bunch of these and 50% or 75% or 35% all have the same problem and we can solve for that. And really doing your research on that product market fit before you create a solution in search of a problem. So those are the things that we work with. We work with companies that are pre-revenue. I like at least a demo of a product. And I like a demo to be mobily accessible so that you can be out in the field as you're pitching government investors or government buyers. You can quickly pull something up and show it. That sort of level of preparation where it's not just a deck you have to send around via email, but you're ready to demo the product in real time. I've seen really make a big difference in how companies scale.
Fabulous, and really appreciate too some of the practical advice, right? Just like checking out legislation, using some of those free resources to see, is there really even a demand for this? So thank you, and I think most of these folks will be at the happy hour as well, so definitely recommend you connect with them. But I'll hand it over to Chris if you want to, from your perspective, what you and your team look for in a founder.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of the key points that were touched on are absolutely right. I would say when we are first encountering a startup company, because they're coming to us with financing needs, it's typically how much money can I get and what does it cost me, right? Like right off the bat, which I completely get. Having been on the entrepreneur side of the table, those are the questions that are in my mind first and foremost in many of those cases, which for our team, the interesting conversation, I think the more important conversation for us really is, to your point, understanding, okay, what's their view of the market? Where are they trying to get to next? What are the bottlenecks or what's holding them up? What is the critical reason? They don't just simply need dollars. They're trying to accomplish some objectives, and they think financing can help them achieve those goals. Great. I'm much more attuned to hearing, here are my mission objectives. Here's what I'd like to do to achieve those financially. With those dollars in hand, here's where I think we're going to next. I'm less concerned if they've got the right answers and more that they've thought through that full thought process, right? Because we all are going to have to survive, adapt, overcome as reality hits us in the face. But when people are very, very collaborative, very partnership-oriented, want to walk you through their entire trajectory and plan of attack, that puts us in a great position to structure up something that's effective specifically for that team at the most capital-efficient cost that we can do. Because we're not successful if our clients aren't successful. If they have great outcomes, they tell their friends, they tell their contracting officers. That begets more business on our side. That allows us to do well for our investors as well. So that self-reinforcing feedback loop, I think, is really key, and begins with our borrowers being able to tell us, here's our mission, here's where we're trying to go next, in a very thoughtful way.
Excellent.
Can I add to that just briefly?
Go for it.
Because I think you hit on something really important, which is the simplification of a narrative. And being really clear that you can explain your product to a fourth grader. That's the rule of thumb for me. Can a 10-year-old understand what you're doing and why it's important and what the technology does? And I see a lot of founders get hung up on the technological specs of why they're so innovative and why it's their moat or the specifics. And the reality is both investors and buyers, until later conversations, don't want to get that deep with you. They want to understand the problem set and they want to understand the solution set in a way that a fourth grader can understand. Did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think adding to everything that everybody said, which is like literally you should all be writing this down because that's like the cheat sheet. That's the answer to the test. Exactly. That's literally the answer to the test. Everybody here wants to study entrepreneurship. Great, that's the answer to the test. Emotional intelligence. Yeah, if I'm going to be sitting with you bleeding at midnight, literally metaphorically or otherwise, I don't want to have to choke you out every night, right? Emotional intelligence. I really don't really care where you went to school. That's wonderful. I'm the dumbest guy in the room. That's been established. What are you doing for me that's going to make me actually do my mission better, right? Like, how are you powering me up? We all have superpowers, right? We all truly do. What are your superpowers? Don't try to be something you're not. Yeah, work on your weaknesses from time to time, but like if you're better at pitching, you're better at talking to people, or like I don't understand how to do some of that fancy geometrical algebra, even if I do. So to me, the definition of success is play to your superpower, but be able to explain to folks like Rachel and Chris how they can help you out. Where does it hurt, right? Like brutally honest with you, like this stuff is not easy, right? The Navy has a mission, but the Navy has $1 trillion budget. We don't, right? And sorry if I offended the Navy, I don't know how much your budget is, but you have a much more larger budget than we do. And please keep me some. But with that in mind, I think like at the end of the day, it's about emotional intelligence and showing the focus that you have to be able to explain to people, hey, I'm fixing this problem. Here's my first 5 customers, my first 15 customers. These are the pilot programs that I'm in. They're 2-year durations. They have net 30% profit margin. But at the end of the day, with your capital, I'll be able to grow 3x in 18 months and reach 50% profit margin by month 30. And therefore, I'm seeking a, 7 to 11x exit. We had like 8% DCF. Oh, and by the way, X intercompany, I just fixed this problem for you, right? If you can't do that this quickly, then go back to the drawing board, man, because you need to talk to your suppliers. You need to talk to your product. You need to have your iteration. You need to have that scar tissue to show to people like us who've actually been there, done that, and got the T-shirts, literally, that like you can actually walk the walk, man.
And I would just add to that. I mean, it's really about what I'm hearing right now from and I agree with this. I'm looking at it from a different perspective. It's about building that relationship and how well they're willing to work in a team. If they're going to walk in and say, I know how to do everything, and I'm working from the partner side, if I work with a small or somebody that's going to bring a critical technology and they're just going to go and do it their own way, that's a telltale sign that I don't want to work with them. And it's probably the same for working with your sponsor or your funder as well. And so that's almost like that's a telltale sign that it's going to be very hard for them to be successful. And so that's, in my mind, I'm always looking for good relationships. I'm looking for somebody that's going to be willing to work in a team, somebody that's going to be, not going to try to take over. And I really liked your point about, you explained to me very simply, if you can't tell me in a minute, the elevator speech makes a difference. If you can't tell me right away what you're going to do, then you're not going to be able to tell anybody else what you're going to do either.
Awesome. Yeah, I feel like this is a super inspiring panel. It's a mixture of, the force of capital and the spirit of optimism that you find in innovation to help change the world, really. So I want to flip that around. Looking at, if you all have any advice for founders, right? So you talked about alignment and, what you look for in a founder, but what should a founder look for when they're doing their own due diligence on whether that's a partnership, right? Potentially with the prime or looking at investment. Any advice there for founders in the audience?
So I'm going to say the same thing. Build a good relationship. And I think that's, I like you're going into the trenches. analogy. If you're going to be up at late at night, I think that was you, Chris. If you're going to be up late at night, you got to be somebody you can trust, somebody you can work with. And I think, and choose carefully. It would be the other thing. That'd be the advice.
I think that if you wait until you're desperate for capital or partnerships, you are immediately at a disadvantage. So the more you can proactively be out making relationships with investors or advisors or potential partners so that you have a Rolodex when you anticipate you'll have a need, the less you will be playing catch up and the more effective you'll be. I think a lot of companies run into problems when they're desperate. And when you've got 3 to 6 months of capital left and you are not in a negotiating position to wait out a dry spell of venture capital or what the markets are doing. As much flexibility as you can give yourself proactively to go to conferences like this, meet interested venture firms or private equity firms, use them as networkers too. Who else do you work with? Who have you worked with on other deals? Who do you think is someone I should meet in the space? They say an entrepreneur's number one job is to fundraise, and I would argue that that's true.
I'll add to that. This is not your last great idea, okay? Like, many people ask me, why is Djian, why do you say that you do what you do all the time? And frankly, what the heck, what else would I be doing? I'm not the kind of guy who'll sit on a beach. That's just not me. I like a beach. But to me, it's about the mission, right? The vision. And when you have a system and a skill set, then to build out to what Rachel and Chris have said, and I think it would, and Jim, I think it would be build relationships, okay? Even if this one fails, you can tell more about a person on how they handled themselves when they failed than when they are successful. It all goes back to emotional intelligence. My motto is always high EQ, cool stuff, and real purpose. Yeah, and work backwards from the end in mind. How does this turn into a business? If not, it's just a hobby. You may be passionate about something. That's great, good for you. Nobody cares. Be obsessed about the problem you're trying to solve. If this is the only thing you're thinking at 2 o'clock in the morning when you're trying to go to sleep, then that's the thing you need to be solving. But if you're not good at it, and nobody wants to work with you, then there's your answer, right? But I think cultivating relationships with investors is more than just looking at them like an open wallet. Don't wait because of your ego or your hubris till the last minute to ask for help. If you just got your biggest contract right now, you should be talking to both of them right now. And then if they come on board, then talk to me. But if at the end of the day, realistically, that's how this world works, okay? Right? Like some of us have to take the fear. We co-lead, so we're happy to lead. I can tell you that through various different institutions I'm an entrepreneur in residence with, my job is to identify folks like you, but I'm the gatekeeper. And if you can't impress me, then you're absolutely not gonna get past me to those folks. And so to me, the way that you impress me, frankly, is by showing me that you have gumption, you have traction, and that you know how to handle failure, right? And you don't wait till the last minute to try to think that you have the ultimate negotiation tactic versus a prime because you came up with a clever idea that's frankly probably not even original, right? So to be brutally honest with you, accept the fact that we all need help. No person, human, man, they, them, has ever changed the world alone. It takes a village. And I think a lot of us have demonstrated here that we're willing to do that, otherwise we would not be spending our entire afternoon doing this. But I think at the end of the day, it takes more than just passion. It takes execution, right? And that's the difference where you really need to make sure you ask for help. Because if you wait till the last minute to talk to Rachel or talk to Chris, we might take your call, but there's nothing I can do for you even if I wanted to.
And I just want to add, Djian, that same process you're talking about going for capital is also the same process you go for contracts. If you wait until the last possible minute to try and fill those coffers because you're too busy working the thing you're trying to solve today, you'll get stuck. I've seen it time and time again. And so I would say that that's a lesson. I would say it's a little outside of the question, but that is something that I would bring up to founders.
Greta, do you mind if I bookend that a little bit? Okay. As a scientist at heart, I can't help, but I'm such a believer in this theme of, from a relationship perspective, digging your well before you're thirsty. As a scientist, I always want to try to assign some metrics to these things, right? Let's measure this. I think just based on a lot of the pitches today, such high-tech operators, I suspect I have a lot of kindred souls out there in that same way. So to this point, ask some very sort of concrete questions as you're developing that relationship early on with a potential capital source. How many people do you speak to in a year? Of those, how many people do you end up writing checks to? How big is your average check size? Of people that you have funded, what frequency are you writing follow-on checks, and at what size to, right? You can really start to develop a probability-weighted value to that relationship. Not that it should be completely driven by the dollars, definitely not. But like, we all need to operationalize these things, right? You need to be able to attach some KPIs around these things to bring some structure, because of all things, capital formation's brutal. It's a slugfest out there in the best of times. And so if for your own sanity alone, if nothing else, ask some of those questions. It's questions that capital providers have heard before, they're definitely comfortable sharing. If they're not, that's a red flag. And it'll help you build a model around these things and help you feel like, okay, I'm moving forward in this process.
2 more questions just to add to that for entrepreneurs. One is, where are you in your capital deployment of your fund?
Yes.
If you're at the beginning or the end, that's a very different decision set for investors. And 2, have you done GovTech deals before? And that was more to the earlier point about people's reluctance to change theses now. Analysts will take your call right now because they have to show a pipeline, and because most funding sources haven't deployed capital in the last 18 months at the rate that they've promised their LPs to. So people will talk to you all day, but unless they have a proven track record of investing in your field, it is not worth your time.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one more thing to that. Honestly, be very careful of foreign asset investments. Like, brutally honest with you, there's a lot of people out there that masquerade being I won't use the lexicon I would typically use, but let's just say they're less than reputable folks who have a lot of money, right? And they really want to find out where to hurt us, right? And so just because somebody says all the sweet things in your ear and they have a fancy website and they're on LinkedIn and they have a business card, it doesn't mean they are who they say they are. And that is realistically out there. That little Tom Clancy moment, that's out there. So pay attention to that, because it does happen.
Excellent. Really appreciate the, practical advice, right, Chris? Whether that's bringing a little structure to the chaos, Rachel, like how to better understand, if it's a fit, it's not just an analyst. They're going to take your call, and Djian, of course, thinking through more hostile investors. So thank you all for that. And last question I'm going to pose to Jim before I hand it over to everyone is any common misconceptions that you think that startups might have as it relates to primes and just, potential opportunities, right, to collaborate?
And so I thought about this question a lot. And so I actually want to turn it into a little bit more, take a little bit more positive spin. So I think having a partner is really good. And I think getting over the fear of, the intellectual property, the loss of intellectual property, the fact that you might get gobbled up, they're not going to fulfill the promises that they made. That's actually happened to us, and we're not we're not an entrepreneur, small entrepreneur starting out. So my feeling, so I just wanted to turn it around. Again, a similar theme, do your homework, working with the prime, build a relationship, look for a good partner, like ARA. We're a good partner. We're small enough that we're entrepreneurial in spirit, so we understand how things get done. And so there are lots of companies like ours out there, and so it's really important, I think, to make sure that you find that right partner, build the relationship, and then deliver on the things that you say, and then hold your partner accountable for the things that they are supposed to be doing as well. And I think the other thing is agreements are really important. A lot of times, as a technologist, I'm technical by nature. You just want to get into the problem, but take your time to make sure the agreement is right. Make sure a non-disclosure agreement is done, the teaming agreement. If there's a subcontract in place, read the fine print. Because that's gonna execute the relationship. That you're trying to do. And so I think that would be, advice of how to work with the primes. I think that, kind of talked about what in the previous question you asked me about, what's that transition path. More than likely, the end state for your product or for your technology is not that contract you're working on. And if you want to take to the next level, you're going to have to find a partner to make that happen.
Go for it.
If I can just add from that, I've made my bread and butter working with folks like you. And I think the biggest thing that I can tell all of you is make sure you can walk the walk, right? If you're going to do something, deliver it. When you're partnering up with a prime, in some areas, my portfolio companies are primes. We want to know that you can actually do what you say you're going to do. And if you can't, ask for help. And dude, listen, we know you don't have the processes in place to do something like quality control and assurance or design for manufacturability or anything of that nature, or augmented reality to train your staff. I'm just throwing out ideas out there. But if you ask for help, you can understand how to integrate with them better, right? And clearly, building on what you said with the contracts, okay, NDA first. Don't do anything without an NDA. Then you move into some kind of conversation agreement where you call it a memorandum of understanding or pilot program. LOI, Rachel said, those things are great, but there's binding and non-binding, right? What are you going to get? And then, and only then, really the truth is contracts are just rules for when things go sideways or how things are going to go and who's going to get kicked the hardest, right? But at the end of the day, I think it's also a way for you to map out your vision and download your blueprint, metaphorically speaking, of what you're trying to accomplish. It's totally okay if you just do one thing, right? I'll leave it at saying, like, my biggest ambition has been to be the guy that owns manhole covers, right? There's only 3 companies on earth that make these things. How awesome is that? You don't even think about them, right? And so the definition of success is find your manhole cover, right? And do that thing really well. And build relationships, because you can have advocates that change companies, that change jobs, that become promoted, that, they might start their own business. You have no idea who you're working with sometimes. So my advice sometimes has been my biggest prime that I've worked with for 14 years now, they looked at me and I looked at him. I was like, I thought he was a god. And he looked at me, he was like, do you have a vision? And it was just this wonderful symbiotic relationship we were able to develop. And to be brutally honest with you, 40% of my customers came from that.
Exactly.
I didn't have to work hard all the time to try to find new people. He introduced me to people because I did what I said I was going to do.
It's the gift that keeps on giving. It's really important. And I think, and to your point, if you do a good job, they're going to recommend you to others because I would say as a prime, it's really hard to find good subcontractors. And especially as a government prime where we are required to do small business subcontracting and we're required to do these things, that is becoming more and more of a challenge to find really quality people to work with. And I would say that's one of the reasons I'm here. I'm looking for good partners. So we're looking at time. I see time right here.
Okay, well, that's actually perfect timing. Just a big thank you, Chris, Jim, Djian, Rachel. The conversation was super stimulating, and honestly, I feel like I've been injected with a little bit of optimism. So nice way to close out our conference here. And also, all the men are very strong sock game. I just noticed this. I want to call it out there. It's old school. I love it. So yeah, we will close out our panel. How can the audience best engage with you, Chris?
Come find me at the happy hour. Short of that, find me on LinkedIn. It's the best way to do it. So we're Leonid Capital Partners on LinkedIn, or then Christopher Lay. We'd love to chat.
Find me at the same website, www.ara.com, or
same D at R3 Experiential or LinkedIn, or ask Greta to put us in touch. I'm happy to take any and all conversations.
Greta's my gatekeeper. She's the bouncer to my inbox. No, find me at the happy hour. If you're if you're thinking about raising capital, if you're thinking about product market fit, if you're thinking about how your federal tech might scale into new markets on the state and local level, let's chat. Might be able to be helpful, or at least connect you to people who will be.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, everyone, again for your time, and thank you again to our fabulous panel. We're almost done. We just have a quick break, and then we'll go to announce the winners. No break. All right, we're going right into the winners. All right, final announcements. Okay, thanks, everyone.